Will come to order. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this timely and important discussion on trade. Very often this committee discusses ways to grow the economy, increase the number of jobs being created, and sell more goods stamped Made in the USA. All of these goals would help the American workforce, and all of these goals are attainable with trade. Simply put, trade means opportunity for small business. After all, 96% of the world's consumers live outside the borders of the United States. Yet of the 28 million small businesses in America, only 1% sell their goods internationally. If we tear down trade barriers, we can make it easier for small businesses to participate in the global marketplace and unleash our nation's most powerful economic force. One of the barriers facing small businesses looking to export is confusion about how to even do it, and a maze of federal resources only sometimes add to the confusion. This committee recognizes that challenge and is working on legislative solutions to better coordinate federal resources so they are more efficient, streamlined, and better able to help business navigate the export process. Beyond that, we need better trade agreements. Currently, we only have one free trade agreement with 20 countries, so that's trade agreements with about 10% of the countries around this globe. Yet nearly half of the goods exported from the United States went to those countries that we had trade agreements with last year. Better trade agreements mean small businesses will be able to access new international customers and offer their products more easily and at a lower cost than ever before. It means that more products will be built and sold. When that happens, jobs are created, wages are lifted, and more opportunity is available to all. That's really what's on the table with this debate, more opportunity for all Americans. We cannot get stronger trade agreements like TPP and TTIP without Trade Promotion Authority, or TPA. Without TPA, American workers will be competing under the same unfair rules they do today. It will be the status quo. With TPA, we can create trade agreements that will level the playing field. We can remove barriers put up by foreign nations that make it more difficult for American businesses to sell their products. Put an American worker against anyone in the world, and I'll take that bet every day of the week and twice on Sunday. But we can't get there without TPA. Trade is also an opportunity to spread American values of economic freedom and individual liberty, freedoms we understand as second nature. Without TPA and subsequently TPP, other nations will dictate the rules of the new economy, nations that do not respect the rule of law or the rights of the individual. Trade is not a choice or a luxury in our modern world. It's a necessity. It is the cornerstone of a strong 21st century economy. Today, we will hear from small businesses who are directly impacted by whether we move forward on TPA and important trade agreements, or whether we bury our heads in the sand and wait while China shapes the contours of the global marketplace. I want to thank again our witnesses for being here, and I now yield to the ranking member for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Year after year, we are told that small businesses are the catalyst for U.S. economic growth, and rightly so, as they create nearly 2/3 of net new jobs and are responsible for countless innovations. A critical subset of this group is small exporters. In fact, 300,000 small businesses are sending their products across the world, and 3 in 5 non-exporting firms are now interested in following suit. Firms that export grow faster, generate more jobs, and pay higher wages than other businesses. Clearly, in order for our economy to continue gaining steam, it will increasingly depend on global commerce to fuel expansion. Despite the advantages of trade, it remains exceedingly difficult for small businesses to enter foreign markets. By some estimate, just 5% of small firms in this country export their goods overseas. Even though small and medium-sized businesses account for 97% of American exporting companies, their exports account for only 1/3 of all U.S. goods shipped overseas. And there are various challenges. It takes time to identify foreign markets, to target new customers, and to learn the ins and outs of the exporting process. In fact, nearly half of small exporters spend a minimum of a few months a year, as well as an average of 8.4% of their annual operating revenue preparing to export. Small companies often have fewer resources to expend on developing a trade strategy or complying with complex regulations. As a result, they consistently enter fewer foreign markets than their larger counterparts, with nearly 60% only entering one, while more than half of large firm exports to 5 or 4 markets or more markets. These difficulties are something we must be mindful of as we consider legislation to fast-track the approval of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Given that details of this agreement are difficult to come by, it is challenging to say if the agreement will help or hinder small businesses. In theory, balanced free trade agreements have the potential to be a significant driver of growth. By eliminating tariffs and other barriers to trade, they can help small firms expand sales globally and create jobs at home. In order for these benefits to be fully realized, however, we must hold our trading partners accountable for unfair trade practices and ensure that our small businesses receive the level playing field they were promised. Truth to be told, small businesses often face challenges when it comes to competing with foreign imports produced in countries with lower labor standards and non-existent environmental protections. Time and again, we're told about promising markets, but little discussion is given to the low-priced goods that will spill onto our domestic marketplace. Is this good for consumers? Maybe. Is it good for small businesses? Definitely not. This is something we must be mindful of as we consider legislation that will provide the President with Trade Promotion Authority. This decision will occur against a complicated backdrop. International trade is more complex than even before, dependent on dynamic global macroeconomic trends, ever-changing trade policies, a variety of export promotions, and a mix of enforcement mechanisms. It is absolutely critical that small businesses are able to participate in this global marketplace, but achieving this goal should not require unfairly harming those entrepreneurs solely doing business at home. I would like to thank our witnesses for their testimony and for being here today. I look forward to hearing your perspective on these very complex issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd ask that committee members, if they have an opening statement, prepared to submit them for the record. And I'll just take a moment to explain our timing rules here. You get 5 minutes to testify. A yellow light will come on to let you know you have 1 minute to wrap up, and the red light will come on, and we'd ask that you complete your testimony within that time, if at all possible. We'll give you a little bit of flexibility, but not too much. And we'll go ahead and introduce our witness panel here. Our first witness is Brian Biron. He is the Executive Director for the Global Public Policy Lab at eBay, Inc. In this role, Mr. Biron has covered public policy issues for eBay and PayPal in the European Union and Australia. Mr. Biron has a Bachelor of Arts from the St. Joseph University and a Master's from George Washington University, and we welcome you here this morning. Our second witness will be Dyke Messenger, who is the President and CEO of Power Kerbers, Inc., in Salisbury, North Carolina, where he's been president and CEO since 1981. Mr. Messenger received his undergraduate degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and his Master of Business Administration from Tulane, and we welcome you here as well. Our third witness today is Michael E. Stanek, Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Hunt Imaging, LLC. Mr. Stanek serves on the Board of Trustees of the National Small Business Association and is testifying today on NSBA's behalf. He received his undergraduate degree from Cleveland State University, and we thank you for your testimony as well. And I'll now yield to Ms. Velasquez to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to introduce Tim Brightbill. Mr. Brightbill is a partner in the international trade practice of Wiley Rein, where he represents clients on all aspects of international trade law and policy, including trade remedies, export controls, and custom matters. As a former vice chair and current member of the Industry Trade Advisory Committee on Services and Finance Industries, he advises the U.S. government on free trade agreements and matters concerning WTO. He's also an adjunct professor for international trade law and regulation at Georgetown University Law School. From 1994 to 1995, he served as counsel to the House Small Business Committee on Small Business. Welcome back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll now go to our panel. Mr. Biron, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting eBay to testify on how U.S. small businesses are using technology to reach international markets. Our company is a truly global platform with nearly 60% of our revenue generated outside the United States. We enable over 150 million users in over 200 countries. For the first time in history, nearly every entrepreneur and small business can use technology to reap the benefits of trade on a global scale, an opportunity traditionally open only to the largest multinational corporations. We are literally entering an age of micro multinationals. Some small businesses have always been engaged in trade, often as a supplier to a very giant company. But today, technology is creating a new model of direct global commerce by small businesses. We call it the Global Empowerment Network, and it is based on the powerful combination of the Internet, global commerce platforms like eBay, technology-enabled payment services like PayPal, modern shipping services, and the knowledge of e-commerce exporting opportunities. Let me provide some numbers from the eBay Public Policy Lab's 2015 U.S. Small Business Global Growth Report, a copy of which I would ask to submit to the committee record. As I mentioned, U.S. small businesses have always been exporters, but according to government data, it is just around 1 to 2% of them. By contrast, on eBay, 95% of them export. The traditional small business exporters reach an average of 2 export markets a year. On eBay, over 190,000 U.S. small businesses each exported to consumers on at least 4 continents last year alone. That's truly global sales. These staggeringly different results boil down to some pretty simple data on exporter survivability. The World Bank has studied small business exporters in 5 upper-income European countries and found that 85% of small businesses that start exporting quit the effort by the end of the 3rd year. That is just a 15% success rate. Exporting is hard. On eBay, the success rate for U.S. small businesses was 74% from 2010 to 2014. That's 85% failure versus 74% success. The Internet trade landscape is also more open to newcomers. It is more inclusive. For example, the largest 5% of U.S. exporters account for 82% of U.S. trade, but on eBay, the largest 5% of exporters account for just 55%. I find this global trade data very exciting, but you all represent people, not numbers, and eBay is about empowering people. Let me tell you about 2. Brian Robinson owns the Music Farm in Canton, Ohio. He and his 11 employees export more than 40% of the Music Farm's inventory. Great Sky Gifts is owned by a woman named Colleen Rast. She employs 4 people in Kalispell, Montana. From there, they have exported to 99 countries. You know better than anyone in Congress that small businesses face huge challenges. They take risks, they work incredibly hard, and they face intense competition. It's the same when they trade globally. At eBay, we are working to help address some of those challenges and reduce barriers. Take language. Among other innovations, our investment in machine translation technology has lowered language as a barrier to U.S. exporters by 66% since 2004. There are also things policymakers can do. eBay would propose 3 to you. First, raise the U.S. low-value customs de minimis threshold, the level below which goods are exempted from import duties and paperwork, and make raising other countries' de minimis thresholds a top trade negotiating priority. Raising the de minimis is basically a one-step free trade policy for small businesses. Second, modernize global postal systems across the world. Micro multinationals regularly utilize postal services because of their widespread networks. Those services are key to this global trade model. Finally, the U.S. government has many excellent programs, as you've mentioned, Mr. Chairman, designed to help businesses export, but many of those programs were not developed with small e-commerce businesses in mind. I would urge the committee to review existing government export promotion programs to be more supportive of these e-commerce micro multinationals. Small and mid-sized businesses can contribute to their local economy and regularly serve customers around the world. Globalization itself can be a better system. It can be more open and inclusive. I encourage you all to help achieve that future, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Messenger, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Velasquez, and my Congressman, Congresswoman Adams. Good to see you. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today as the President of Power Curbers, Inc., a 62-year-old company that was founded in Salisbury, North Carolina. I'm also appearing today on behalf of the National Association of Manufacturers, the nation's largest industrial trade association in the United States, with over 14,000 members. Power Curbers was founded by two businessmen with a design for the world's first automatic curb machine. This engineering breakthrough helped streamline the process of laying out highways, medians, and other road infrastructure projects. While we still produce machines using the same curbing technology, we have grown into one of the leading paving machinery manufacturers for both agricultural and infrastructure projects. Power Curbers' success in the United States has been fueled in substantial part by our ability to sell overseas. Since the early 60s, we have been exporting our equipment and have exported now to over 90 countries throughout the world. By exporting, we're simultaneously helping create safer, more efficient infrastructure overseas and supporting good-paying manufacturing jobs in North Carolina and Iowa. International sales and exports comprise 40% of our total revenue and are critical to our continued innovation and growth. More broadly, exports support 154,000 jobs in North Carolina and 81,000 jobs in Iowa, more than 20% of each state's manufacturing employment. For example, on our order board today, we have machines of approximate value of $350,000 to $400,000 destined to Chile, Panama, Saudi Arabia, Japan, the Philippines, India, Uzbekistan, and Canada. More importantly, during the financial crisis, it was our international business that kept us going. Our international business was 70 to 80% of machine sales those 5 years. We don't just talk international business, we live it at Power Curbers. At our regular meetings with employees, we have a large world map on the wall of our break room. Our employees know where every machine ships, and we bring back pictures and job stories to share our success overseas. This ties them to the work done with our machinery that is far beyond our borders, so they know their jobs are dependent on international business success. Additionally, we have significant competition in our industry, and that makes us all better companies. But our company and our American competitors face real tariff competition, which is highlighted in my official testimony. To continue to thrive, manufacturers like Power Curbers need to see open markets and a more level playing field. I'd like to focus on a few key trade issues on which Power Curbers and the NAM are focused to grow competitiveness and success of our manufacturers overseas. As was just stated, the U.S. has the most open market of any major economy, with the lowest tariffs of any country in the G20. Indeed, more than two-thirds of all manufactured imports entered the U.S. duty-free in 2013. Yet, manufacturers in the U.S. face steeper trade barriers abroad than virtually any major country, including Mexico, China, and Europe, largely because those countries have entered into more market access agreements than the United States. Out of 138 countries measured by the World Economic Forum, the United States faces higher tariffs than all but 8 countries. All but 8 countries. That's ridiculous. Why are European Union tariffs so much lower than ours? Because they've entered into free trade agreements all over the world. Congress can and must do more to expand U.S. manufactured good exports and open new markets if we're going to grow manufacturing and the jobs it supports in the United States. Passage of TPA, which lapsed in 2007, is critical to restore U.S. leadership on trade and help ensure the negotiation of strong market-opening agreements that foster new opportunities and a more level playing field for our nation's manufacturers. The United States is now sitting on the sidelines as other countries move forward and more aggressively open markets, promote exports for their business at the expense of ours. By standing still, the U.S. is falling behind in the global economy. It's time to reverse that trend and move to enact and implement legislation and programs that will boost America's global competitiveness. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Stanek, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you on this timely and important topic. Hunt Imaging is a manufacturer of dry and liquid electrostatic toners and developers used primarily in high-speed computer printers. I'm proud to be representing not only Hunt Imaging, but also the National Small Business Association and its international arm, the Small Business Exporters Association. Hunt was a spinoff from a Fortune 200 company 19 years ago and has operated as an independent company since. In addition to our headquarters in Berea, Ohio, we currently operate a branch in Belgium, but are in the process of closing that facility due to a sustained downturn in European sales. As a company whose history emanates from a multinational organization, we were fortunate to have had a strong background in exporting, a background the vast majority of our small business brethren don't share. Even with our prior experience, however, we have learned that the opportunities to expand our international presence have declined since we became a standalone entity. Finding effective distribution partners is an essential component of small business entry into the export arena. In general, small businesses are challenged in having limited resources upon which to draw when entering international markets, and frankly, quite often have a fear factor in attempting to take that step. Possibly the biggest challenge for a small business, and certainly ours, is finding international opportunities to pursue. When we were part of a large corporation, we had a worldwide network of colleagues who could not only pinpoint opportunities for us, but also pursue them on our behalf. As a small private organization, we are challenged to uncover potential sales opportunities and have struggled with identifying domestic resources to assist in that process. One suggestion to help small businesses in participating in the 95% of the worldwide purchasing market that exists outside the U.S. is to offer a one-stop shop, ideally within the Department of Commerce and more specifically within the International Trade Administration, that would have a centralized staff dedicated to assisting small businesses in all aspects of exporting. A beginning-to-end focus for each company could tremendously ease the complications that seem to be inherent in this process. Free trade agreements are likewise extremely important as they lower foreign barriers and produce a more level playing field. Lowering the hassle factor of exporting greatly increases the attractiveness to small companies. Given the importance of small business to both the European and Asia-Pacific economies, it is vital that the TTIP and TPP negotiations address the specific needs of small business in all aspects of their agreements, and we support the passage of TPA to allow this to happen. If we desire American small business to export more, it is also important to reduce variable costs like tariffs. Many countries impose tariffs on U.S. exports that are substantially more than our own, and a web of non-tariff barriers overseas often shuts out U.S. goods and services. These non-tariff barriers can include items such as foreign patent and trademark costs, paperwork requirements, and performance bonds and licenses. Interpreting and comprehending regulations has also proven to be a challenge that exhausts a small firm's resources and drains our wallets when we have to turn to outside professionals. NSBA supports the creation of a centralized website that is monitored and collects up-to-date information on regulation and policies for the most commonly traded goods and services. Having a strong commitment to intellectual property rights is vital to protect our innovative products and services. The creation of simplified methods for filing and renewing trademarks and copyrights will provide more timely enforcement of these rights, which are the result of the innovations of our small businesses. On a broader scale, we also need to get more community banks into export finance and educate them on available government lending programs so they can better advise their small business customers who are considering exporting. The U.S. financial sector seems to be less engaged in world trade than are the financial sectors in Europe. While there is no doubt that some of America's biggest companies can continue to increase their exports, the largest untapped resource for American exports is small and medium-sized companies. Just over 1% of these businesses currently export, and many believe it is too burdensome or risky, or just don't know where to start. Federal agencies can play an important role in helping to reduce exporting barriers for small businesses and help these entrepreneurs tap into new markets and grow. Thank you for hearing my testimony, and I look forward to responding to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brightbill, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on the important issue of expanding the role of small business in global commerce, and it's good to be back at the House Small Business Committee today. I've practiced international trade law for 20 years, and I've always focused on helping American companies, industries, and workers. I work with members of a wide variety of industries, from solar panels to steel to hand tools to school notebooks. I also work with many U.S. companies who provide services here and abroad. My job is to help these companies grow, prevent unfair trade practices from harming them, and to help eliminate trade barriers overseas. As this committee knows, small businesses face enormous challenges in the area of international trade. According to the President's 2015 trade agenda, and as Chairman Chabot said earlier, there are 28 million small businesses in the United States, but only 1% of them export their merchandise to other countries. And of those small businesses that do export, most export to only one country, Canada or Mexico. This demonstrates how small businesses often struggle to overcome steep tariffs, trade barriers, paperwork, fees, and other significant obstacles. Now, the U.S. government has taken steps toward removing these barriers, but there's much more to be done. I'd like to list just a few areas of priority for Congress and the administration that are particularly relevant to small businesses. First, on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The U.S. government does have a potentially important opportunity to create jobs, expand trade and manufacturing, and improve the global rules of international trade with the TPP free trade negotiations. If approved, TPP would be the largest U.S. free trade agreement involving 12 countries and more than 40% of global trade. And that agreement should help U.S. small businesses export, not just by eliminating jobs, but by streamlining customs procedures, eliminating trade barriers, and developing more transparent regulatory procedures. There are other benefits, such as the elimination of barriers to e-commerce and express delivery services, and also new disciplines on state-owned enterprises. When U.S. small businesses export, they should not have to compete with foreign governments. And while China is a notable example of the problem, SOEs play substantial roles in the economies of TPP countries like Malaysia and Vietnam, as well as Russia, Brazil, India, and many others. At the same time, TPP poses potential threats to small businesses. First, the opening of the U.S. market to additional foreign competition could harm some smaller businesses and could lead to some jobs being lost in lower wage positions to lower wage positions in other TPP countries. Second, small business goals and objectives are less likely to be fully represented in these negotiations. And in fact, while the TPP contains a chapter on small and medium enterprises, the details of the agreement are not well known. Before it considers TPP, Congress must first take up trade promotion authority. The Senate is considering TPA legislation and amendments this week, and the House will do so shortly. And as this debate has progressed, the number one theme that we've heard over and over again is one of enforcement. Congress should not approve new trade agreements until it has better ways of enforcing our existing agreements. And there is an opportunity here. I think the best way to build support for TPA among Republicans and Democrats is to improve trade enforcement for all types of businesses, including small businesses. First, Congress should approve much-needed trade enforcement measures as part of TPA. U.S. industry has proposed a set of 5 trade law changes that it views as essential for domestic companies and their workers. These provisions were included in the Customs and Trade Bill that passed the Senate Finance Committee on a bipartisan basis. They should be included in TPA as well. Second, Congress should improve the ENFORCE Act legislation to guard against foreign companies who engage in trade fraud and evasion. Senator Wyden has championed this legislation for years, and again, it was included in the Customs and Trade Bill that passed the Senate Finance Committee on a bipartisan basis. Third, Congress should address the important issue of currency manipulation, and in particular, it should approve legislation directing the Commerce Department to investigate currency manipulation as an illegal subsidy. I am happy to address specific aspects of TPP or the Trade and Services Agreement or the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and there has been a very good ITC study done on that recently. But regardless of the agreement, the same challenges remain. Encouraging exports by U.S. small businesses is imperative to allowing American industry to expand and American workers to prosper. Thank you for addressing these issues today, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And I want to especially thank all 4 of the panel members for keeping within our time limits to almost to the word. So well done. And the testimony was good too. And I'll begin with recognize myself for 5 minutes, and Mr. Beer, and I'll begin with you if I could. We are certainly aware that the statistics are there's only about 1 to 2% of small businesses that actually trade internationally, yet eBay's been able to have, because of your platform, a 95% of those. And you mentioned 4 continents. Those are incredibly, I think, positive numbers. I'd just like to hear if you wanted to expound upon that a bit, what successes they've had, why you think there's such a discrepancy between the overall small business community and those that operate through eBay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sure. One of our studies that we did in fact try to look at what are the kinds of barriers that are so much lower when a business is operating online than not. And to give some perspective, I think what we're talking about at eBay is the fact that you now have a completely different business model for very small businesses to try to go and engage in global markets. And it's literally a paradigm shift. And my colleagues at the table here, I mean, outstanding and inspiring export stories, but from businesses that I think are exporting in the way businesses have exported for years. At eBay, the idea that these micro businesses are targeting specific countries, are investing, for example, in the kinds of expertise it takes to engage in Germany or sell to France or sell to Brazil. It isn't like that on the Internet with really small businesses. Instead, the platform itself that allows a small business to have their product be seen. So it's essentially global advertising. Or it replaces the need to have trust in an individual business with trust in the platform. Or, for example, on eBay, the feedback system that allows a consumer anywhere in the world to have trust in an individual small business, maybe a 5-person business, as I said, off in Montana or in Ohio. These are transformative changes. And what it means is that it is almost harder, I say, not to export than it is to export. We do have some small businesses that are operating in the U.S. and all around the world who literally choose not to export because they believe, for example, that maybe the complexities are too much. They don't want to deal with currency. They don't want to deal with some things. But instead, most choose to sell to whom they can sell, and that ends up being global trade. And so now that doesn't mean that it's simple. Like I said, language is a huge challenge, and literally moving stuff across borders still is hard. So whether it's the shipping itself, I mentioned postal systems, or the complexity of customs and duties. You know, when you're a 5-person business and you're having to deal with customs and duties for 50 countries, you know, that is way too much. That's way too hard than it ought to be.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And Mr. Messenger, I'll turn to you next if I can. You had mentioned, among other things, that you are in favor of TPA. And I know Mr. Brightbill mentioned some of the concerns about jobs and things like that, and also mentioned that The Senate, we think, is going to be taking it up this week, I believe, and the House probably sometime in the near future. And I happen to be a supporter and hope it passes. But I know some of my colleagues who are opposed to it are concerned about jobs being lost and companies taking their business overseas and setting shop up over there instead of in the U.S. And you know, my belief is basically we create far more jobs than we lose. That's why one of the reasons I'm in favor of it. But could you comment on TPA and what it would mean to your business in particular, and what you think it would do relative to the hiring of more employees, or do you think you'd end up letting employees go? What do you anticipate in your business?
Well, as it was said, this TPP, which is kind of the hottest topic under TPA, is the most far-reaching agreement that we've ever encountered, and because Asia is such a rapidly growing part of the world, it's going to mean huge advantages to us because we have Chinese competitors. They're exporting today to those countries, and it's going to mean through that reduction in tariff, it's going to mean, I can't tell you how many more jobs, but we're very aggressive in the international market, so it will mean job growth for us. But more importantly, if you look at the statistics for manufacturing jobs in this country, they have grown every year, outside of the financial crisis, of course, but every year consistently since NAFTA. So manufacturing jobs are going to continue to grow, and I would predict rapidly with the approval of TPP.
Okay. Thank you. My time's expired. Ranking members recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brightbill, do you believe that the TPP will realistically expand the number of foreign markets that American small businesses enter, or will the non-tariff and logistical barriers remain too much for them to overcome? We know that, for the most part, our small businesses trade with Mexico and Canada, but will we achieve more than that? And if not, why?
Ms. Velasquez, it's very difficult to know. I mean, we know what some of the positives potentially are out there. Certainly having common tariffs or reduced tariffs could be a positive thing. You'd have less of a spaghetti bowl of trade agreements that companies have to deal with. If you have harmonized standards, harmonized reduction of technical barriers to trade, harmonized assessment of products, that could be a positive. If you have harmonized customs procedures, again, as has been pointed out, getting goods through customs, the delays and the paperwork and the fees are often extraordinary. My concern is you have to have a way to enforce all of those things that are written on paper, and it's not clear to me that all the enforcement tools are there or readily accessible to small business.
Let's talk about the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. It was sold to us as being able to support 70,000 jobs and increase U.S. export by $11 billion. However, since that agreement took effect in 2012, export to Korea have increased by less than $1 billion. We were told 12. Meanwhile, Korean imports to the U.S. have surged more than $12 billion, resulting in a net loss of 75,000 jobs, U.S. jobs. So why is that?
Again, I think
is the lack of enforcement?
I think lack of enforcement, and there are powerful incentives in these other countries, even after a free trade agreement is reached, to keep their trade barriers up and to keep their markets closed. We hear this around the country. So that is the challenge that we face in negotiating a good agreement, and one that gives us ways to enforce it after the ink is dry.
So my question to you is, do you expect that we are similarly being sold a false bill of goods regarding the TPP?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a large agreement. It involves many countries. In some, I think there's potential for improvement. In others, I think it'll be very difficult to get rid of those barriers even over time.
And I agree with you. The lack of enforcement obviously is going to produce the results that we have seen with the U.S.-Korean agreement. I have another question, and this is, it has been central to the whole debate, and that is, how does currency manipulation affect small businesses?
Yes. Well, currency manipulation is a form of a subsidy. The Peterson Institute of International Economics, very well respected by Congress and the administration, called currency manipulation the biggest subsidy of them all. And the estimates over time as to, for example, how much China's currency is undervalued have ranged from anywhere from 10% to 40% or more. So what we're seeking and what industry has sought in the legislation that's moving forward on the Senate side is to say that the Commerce Department should look at currency manipulation as a subsidy, and if it finds it to be a subsidy, you impose a duty like any other subsidy, a grant or a loan guarantee, to offset that unfair trade practice.
Mr. Brightbill, for the record, should Congress require that free trade agreements, including the TTP, incorporate enforceable rules regarding currency manipulation?
Yes, I think they should.
Thank you. Mr. Byrne, as an intermediary operating in the U.S., eBay is not held liable for the unlawful actions of its users. This is the case in foreign countries?
Internet liability law is different in different countries. We believe that it's clear, and I would like to be clear, that when eBay has knowledge of improper actions by our users anywhere, then there is liability. It's a case of the importance of when our users, unknowingly to us, are engaging in some kind of malfeasance.
So
that's where, but it's different in different countries. We believe that actually U.S. law on Internet intermediary liability is the most pro-growth and is something that we think can be promoted through trade agreements.
The gentlelady's time's expired, but if she'd like to follow up,
No,
we'll give her in just a
how
minute.
has that affected eBay's decision to enter countries that do not have such protections?
There's no question that we're able to operate more effectively in countries that have adequate Internet intermediary liability laws. It's just that they can be slightly different in different markets. We believe that promoting the standards and the balance that's in the DMCA and Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, the two cornerstone U.S. policies, these are something that we believe it's important for our negotiators to achieve.
And a yes or no answer. Do you feel that this issue should be dealt with in this pending free trade agreement?
Oh, yes, we think it's an important priority.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Missouri, the Vice Chairman of this committee, Mr. Lou Kumar, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the members or the witnesses for being here today. I'd like to follow up a little bit more on the currency manipulation question. The other three members of the witnesses of the panel, they didn't get to answer the question. So, Mr. Stanek, would you support a provision in the TPP on currency manipulation, or do you believe it's not something that needs to be addressed in the agreement?
Thank you, sir. It is not an issue that we've come up against directly, so I don't necessarily have a direct opinion on that.
Mr. Messenger?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm not current on currency manipulation issues. It would be difficult for me to.
Mr. Mirably?
Small business trade over our platform is impacted by currency. Whether or not there should be a specific provision in the TPA on manipulation, I'm really not comfortable making an advice on that.
Because I was talking to one of the larger, president of one of the larger banks in the country, in fact, one that clears a lot of international transactions. And I asked him this question because I was leaning toward making sure there was something in the TPA or TPA and TPP to protect against currency manipulation. He said, you know what goes on all the time? We do it ourselves. So how are you going to keep a currency manipulation from the Chinese and whoever against our own currency manipulation? I think it's a valid point, and it points out the fact that this goes back and forth, and I'm not sure how you enforce that. I think it gets back to Mr. Brightbill's point. So I appreciate the comments. With regards to intellectual property, to me this is a really important thing, especially for small businesses, because that's where a lot of the innovation is driven from, small business people. They come up with ideas, and they're the entrepreneurs that come up and have an idea, and they develop a business around it, and off they go. Do you see protections being developed in the TPA that would be something you support, or is it not an extensive enough bill or authority at this point? What's your thoughts so far? Mr. Barron, let's go down the line.
We believe that intellectual property enforcement is very important. We think that the balance that exists in U.S. intellectual property law is very important to promote innovation. And lastly, we believe that we're more likely to get sound intellectual property law with our trade partners through trade agreements than not through trade agreements.
Mr. Messenger.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. We're not going to have an opportunity to get to those subjects until we, have a trade agreement with these folks. And
but you believe it needs to be a part of the agreement?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Stanek.
Yes, sir. We believe very strongly that the intellectual property rights need to be protected in the trade agreements. Our small business members have enough challenges sometimes protecting their intellectual property domestically. They don't need to have the same types of issues on an international basis.
Mr. Brightbill.
Congressman, thanks for the question. We agree, and my clients agree, that intellectual property protection is a serious problem around the world and needs to be addressed. I do think, my understanding is it is an area of emphasis in the TPP agreement, which is important.
How do you enforce that?
Sorry?
How do you enforce patent infringement, intellectual rights?
Well, patent infringement, you can, there are various options. You can bring cases in district court. You can also bring a case at the International Trade Commission here in the United States, a Section 337 action, where if a foreign country is violating a patent or intellectual property, they can impose a barrier at the border to stop those counterfeit goods from coming in.
Kind of interesting, whenever the Chinese are over here swapping trying to steal all of our intellectual secrets from a lot of our big manufacturers, and we're worried about this. It's kind of ironic.
Well, and Congressman, you're right. On trade secrets, there's more that could be done in our trade agreements there as well.
Huge problem. We need to be, and I think the chairman needs to be congratulated on this, because this is, we've had a hearing on this before, so I thank him for this emphasis. Mr. Barron, you talked about raising the threshold for minimum taxes on exports. Can you elaborate just a little bit? I've got about 30 seconds left. I got one more question to ask you before we get done.
I believe right now the de minimis, for example, in the U.S. is $200. The customs reauthorization proposes taking that to $800. Sellers on eBay, when they export and their product gets returned to them, they oftentimes find themselves paying import duties on their own return. Moving that up to $800 would reduce that burden for them.
Okay, very good. Very quickly, XM is a really big talking point around here. I think it's an important part of any sort of export discussion. Would you support reauthorization or not, Mr. Bierman?
XM Bank is not something that our sellers, I think, are involved with.
Okay. Mr. Messenger.
Absolutely. It's critical to small manufacturers.
Mr. Stanek.
Yes, we support not only reauthorization, but an increase to 25% threshold.
Mr. Brightbill.
These are my personal views only. I do support EXIM reauthorization, but there are some troubling things that have happened at EXIM, and those need to be looked at as well. China has recently formed an Asia Development Bank, so I think we do need a counterweight. China shouldn't be the world's financier.
Thank you, and I thank the chairman. I think it's. I think this is the second hearing we've had. A group of small business people who have indicated unanimously either support for or neutral position on XM. I think it's important to note that, Mr. Chairman, that XM is a really, really big part of supporting small business in this country. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman's time's expired. Gentlelady from New York, Ms. Adams, who is the ranking member of the Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations Subcommittee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. North Carolina. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I apologize.
That's
North Carolina.
all right. That's
I was wondering why you were smiling.
I grew up in that area a little bit.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yes, I claim North Carolina's home. Let me thank the ranking member as well, Member Velasquez, and gentlemen, for your testimony. Mr. Messenger, thank you for being here. And thank you for representing some of the finest companies that we have in North Carolina, particularly in the 12th District, which I represent. and I'm proud to highlight North Carolina's best. But as we look to improve federal international trade programs to meet the needs of small businesses, business exports, can you offer any advice as to what sort of financial and counseling resources would better enable small businesses to begin exporting and help existing small businesses, business exporters grow internationally?
Thank you. As you know, the Department of Commerce has an outstanding export promotion office. In our early years, we used them extensively. In addition, states have really good export offices, North Carolina in particular. I think there are adequate tools available if manufacturers will seek them out to help them promote exports. And I would further say that Ex-Im Bank is a tool that from time to time we have found critical in competing with our German competitor, who I don't know what Germany does, but if you need it, they've got it for their business people. We don't have that in this country. And so I think reauthorization of Ex-Im would go a long way towards helping us compete. Thank you.
All right, thank you. An ongoing discussion we have here on the Hill is whether or not to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank. And while many other countries have similar government export financing institutions, many of my colleagues can't agree on whether to reauthorize Export-Import or under what conditions to reauthorize it. So can you speak to the significance of having small businesses effectively compete within the international markets and the importance of federal guarantees in supporting our small businesses internationally?
Yeah, further to Ex-Im, and I don't know the agency and its balance sheet financial statement, but as I understand it, they return a substantial amount of money to the U.S. government through their loan guarantees. Ex-Im supports far, far more small businesses than they do larger manufacturers. I know that the total volume of Ex-Im guarantees cover larger manufacturers, but without Ex-Im reauthorization, a lot of smaller people like ourselves get cut off from opportunities overseas.
Okay. My last question is for Mr. Messenger, for you as well as Mr. Stanek. As Congress analyzes the arguments for and against TPP, and in the very near future, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, better known as TTIP, it might be useful to go beyond the broad point of the potential to increase market access for the U.S. exporters and ask the question, market access for who? What are the potential share of trade benefits or challenges that could accrue to small and medium-sized businesses? And also, what about minority-owned businesses as well?
Well, I think the opportunities for all businesses exist with these agreements. I happen to believe that with free trade, open trade, relations improve between countries. I think we've seen that time and again. So I'm fully supportive of that.
Mr. Stanek?
Yes, Congresswoman. I believe that the greatest benefit that we will see from the trade agreements is the simplification of the process. Right now, it's very complicated for a small business to attempt, particularly one who has not been in the export business previously, to attempt to engage in that with the various rules and regulations that exist around the world. And being able to simplify that whole process will open up the doors for exportation for so many more companies.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, you're back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. Since the chairman screwed up and identified the lady from North Carolina as from being from New York, I probably should say that the next questioner is from North Carolina, not New York, but I won't do that. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Hanna, who is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Contracting Workforce, is recognized for 5 minutes. And I apologize.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just make a comment about the Import-Export Bank. I do support it. I know, for example, Boeing is talking about exporting some of their jobs, some of their manufacturing, I believe. And what's true, and you said this yourself, Mr. Messenger, is that there are hundreds and hundreds of small companies that depend on these larger companies to pull all this together and export their products. But, Mr. Brightbill, the assumption of enforcement, just flying around the room here today, that it's actually doable. For example, currency manipulation in China, the numbers, as you said, go from 10% to 20% to 30%. Nobody really knows. And it's a fungible number anyway because it's something that can change in a heartbeat. But first, two things. What do you think the actual number, say, is from China, in your opinion? And are the things that we assume are enforceable? I mean, listen to Elizabeth Warren, and you know, it's fair that in my office we get a lot of very negative calls over this because people are afraid. They look at what Ms. Velasquez says, and they agree with her. And so, but it's also clear we can't wall ourselves off to a world of opportunity. So if the key to all this is telling people you can enforce things and make something change that you don't like, is it doable? And what have we seen that would lead us to believe that? We haven't seen much. So how do you, I mean, enforcement is just a word if there's no teeth. So go ahead.
Congressman, I think those are very good points. On currency manipulation, I do still believe that China is undervaluing its currency to favor its exports, and the history of that over the last 5 to 10 years is overwhelming. I mean, there are estimates that millions of American jobs have been lost, and that that has increased the U.S. trade deficit by $200 billion to $500 billion per year. So you ask how to enforce it. What lawmakers have proposed is that you treat currency manipulation as a countervailable subsidy. You let the Commerce Department look at it like any other subsidy. So if there's a financial contribution, if there's a benefit to Chinese companies as a result, and if it's specific or an export subsidy, then you impose a duty at the end. And I think that the IMF and the Commerce Department and other agencies are capable of figuring out the extent of currency manipulation.
Is somehow the core of this argument, though, that you can't deal with any of this unless you have agreements? I mean, in the absence of agreements, we have what we have. So in the presence of agreements, we have more opportunity. I mean, let's face it, the goal is our tariffs are low. The goal is to lower everyone else's so that we can have a more free movement. But if currency manipulation continues at some level, then without enforcement. And the other thing that bothers me about this is the path to enforcement is impossible, almost. I mean, you take a small company, and Mr. Messinger, I have actually used your equipment, laid thousands of pieces of curb. You make good stuff. How do you respond to that? I mean, what do you?
Well, first of all, some of
takes years.
Some of the enforcement changes would be changes to U.S. law. They wouldn't necessarily be in the trade agreements. We're just taking advantage of this opportunity while we're passing TPA or TPP, make these small changes to U.S. law and regulations at the same time. So I think that is possible. Another issue that we talked about is state-owned enterprises and how you address that. My understanding is that the TPP does, for the first time, address the problem of state-owned enterprises competing with U.S. companies around the world, and it would allow U.S. companies and the U.S. government to get information. So if they see unfair competition in China or a third country or even here in the United States, they can get information on that, and they can raise in dispute settlement in the trade agreement itself. So you have to make the dispute settlement process work in that trade agreement to be able to enforce.
So you see that as a positive thing, obviously, because we don't have it. We don't have a good system now.
We don't have any system for addressing state-owned enterprises.
Right. I mean, they have,
and
Boeing has Airbus, the subsidized company, right?
So exactly. Now that we've tried to address at the World Trade Organization with mixed results.
Thank you for your time.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. And the Chair would like to note the presence of some guests here this morning from American Samoa, some high school students, and I'd like to defer to the gentlelady from American Samoa, Ms. Radewagen, if she would like to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would like to welcome some of our future leaders of American Samoa. These students are here participating in the Close-Up program. I have a couple questions for you, Mr. Messinger.
If you don't mind, I've got to go over to this side.
Okay.
I'll be back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
I yield back.
And we welcome our guests here this morning for being here. Thank you very much. And the gentlelady from California, Ms. Hahn, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Point of personal privilege, I'd also like to welcome a guest. Trayvana is here. A lot of us are wearing these blue ribbons. It's National Foster Care Week, and there are a lot of youth who've been in the foster care system who are shadowing a member of Congress today. So she's my shadow all day today. So thanks for holding this hearing. I think it's really appropriate as we're talking about TPA and TPP to listen to how it affects our small businesses. And Mr. Messenger, I was noting that in one of the papers up here, I think it was The Hill, talked about the American Association of Manufacturers is against TPP because they feel like it has lost manufacturing, or it will lose manufacturing jobs. So I was just going to ask you what you think should specifically be in this deal that would protect small businesses, particularly those who are in the manufacturing area. Well, what would you like to see specifically in these deals for manufacturers? That would make it a good deal.
Well, first of all, I'm not familiar with that association and their work. As I testified earlier, the history of trade agreements and job growth in the manufacturing sector is very clear. We have continued to grow manufacturing jobs. Even in Korea, manufacturing jobs were increased. Part of the issue in Korea is that the economy collapsed.
So what would you specifically like for us to pay attention to in these deals that would protect small businesses?
It's hard to say. I'm not a legislator. I haven't seen the details of a bill. The main interest that we have is tariff reduction. And as I testified, we're facing we open our markets to everybody, seemingly, and yet we're closed in so many opportunities overseas. So that's my most important issue to us.
Okay, thank you. You know, I represent the Port of Los Angeles, largest, along with Long Beach, is the largest port complex in this country, and they're very good about having programs for small businesses. It's called Trade Connect, and they attempt to reach out to small businesses and educate, even handhold, talk about access to capital to allow small businesses to understand what it would mean to connect to the international trade industry. But Mr. Is it Biron or Byron? Biron. I was wondering, listening to you and talking about eBay and e-commerce, is that a model that we could or should update to educate small businesses in the intricacies of e-commerce? It's a good model, but maybe it needs updating.
I think yes, I think that it is a way to get far more small businesses exporting. I think that it's not as complicated as traditional exporting, which is why the numbers are so vastly different. But one of the 5 points that we talk about with the Global Empowerment Network is, in fact, knowledge of how e-commerce can lead to exporting. And so we do think that there's a role to get that word out.
Is there, and what exactly have you done to maybe get that word out to some of these Trade Connect programs that currently exist here?
For example, eBay has a relationship with the Department of Commerce, and in fact, about a month ago, we had a group of sellers, small business sellers here in town, meeting with some pretty senior officials over at the Department of Commerce to talk about how the existing trade promotion export support programs can be updated to reflect e-commerce small businesses. So we're just beginning that process.
Great. Thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from American Samoa, Ms. Radewagen, who is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to welcome our students who traveled 10,000 miles to be here with us today. We're all very proud of them. Mr. Messinger, I have a couple of questions for you. We hear one of the largest barriers for exporting is understanding and complying with foreign regulations. Can you explain how you keep up with all the changing foreign regulations, including technical barriers and changes in tariffs?
We cannot keep up with all of that. You know, we're a small company. We do what's right. We build a machinery that's compliant with European standards, all international standards, and support it, you know, with outstanding service. And outside of that, that's really all we can do.
Thank you. To better assist with export coordination, what tools should policymakers strengthen or re-examine for inefficiencies to help small businesses' efforts to start or increase trading opportunities? Mr. Messinger.
Well, as I said earlier, I think the Department of Commerce has outstanding resources. Many of the states have tremendous programs, and quite frankly, a lot of our international market intelligence just comes from the Internet. You just get on and start asking questions and looking around, and it's amazing what you can find.
And lastly, this is your day today, Mr. Messinger. When you're looking to export to a new market, what is your biggest obstacle, either domestic or international?
Wow, that's a good question. You know, for the most part, it's the energy and the money that we might have available at any point in time to attack that market. We assess a market by its financial conditions. Do they have enough foreign exchange? Are they earning enough foreign exchange that the labor-machine ratio favors machinery versus hand labor? If it does, then we're going to go out and see if we can scratch something in the dirt and make something happen. So it's probably not a limitation other than just the local economy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Thank you. And the gentleman from Nevada, who is chairman of the Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Most of you already spoke on currency manipulation, and you really don't have much familiarity. But, Mr. Wright-Bill, the question I have for you is, would currency manipulation be better off under the Treasury, handled under the Treasury rather than under TPA? Just a question.
Congressman, we're concerned that what the Treasury Department does currently is not enough. Every 6 months, the Treasury Department is supposed to certify which countries are currency manipulators, and throughout the entire Obama administration, it's refused to name China as a currency manipulator. So I don't think Treasury alone is the solution to this, which is why my clients support a procedure that would allow the Commerce Department to determine whether currency manipulation is a subsidy. In addition, there's also the TPA amendment advanced by Senator Portman from Ohio that would have enforceable requirements for currency manipulation to be addressed in free trade agreements like TPP.
Thank you. This is kind of across the panel here. You know, you've all had success in what you're doing trading overseas. What advice would you give small business, or to get them to maybe get more involved? What advice would you give them to help them have a little courage to step out there and start using the foreign markets? Anybody care to start with that one?
I think the eBay marketplace is a little different, as we've heard from most small businesses. Nearly all of our small businesses do export. Honestly, one of the things we've encouraged them to do is contact Capitol Hill about TPA, because we believe new trade agreements are the only way we're going to get a focus on micro businesses who export, and because this is a very new model for exporting by small businesses.
What I've found in talking with manufacturers that don't do a lot of exporting is that there's some kind of a fear of the unknown, or or something, yet there's opportunities for just about everyone overseas. So, unless you have a desire to start really looking overseas, you certainly aren't going to find it. But as I mentioned earlier, get on the Internet, pose some questions, look in your industry at what might be going on, and it's unbelievable what you can find.
Congressman, we have found our freight forwarder to be of immense help to us. The employees of the freight forwarder are able to help walk us through a lot of the regulations that we are personally challenged with. And I would recommend someone looking to get into the arena to speak with a good freight forwarder and help initiate that process.
Congressman, I think I would focus on the trade barriers and some of the bigger problems. One of the biggest ones that we haven't talked too much about is the lack of common standards and harmonization of standards. We're trying to negotiate a free trade agreement with the European Union right now, but there has not been a lot of movement on the very different regulatory systems. I mean, if a product is safe and effective here, that should be suitable in the European Union as well, and we just have not seen a lot of movement from the EU on that. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at as these trade agreements are negotiated.
Thank you. You just led into my next question, because I think some of those discussions, do you feel like that you're being involved in this trade TPA as businesses in the discussion of fair trade, balanced trade? Do you feel like that your voice is being heard? Because sometimes I feel like, being new here, that we don't utilize the real experts, the real people who get harmed or benefit enough. Is everybody, go ahead.
I feel that we're being heard through our trade association. If not for the trade association, National Small Business Association, I think individually we would have a difficult time being heard. But I believe our voice is heard via that route.
It's good to hear.
Well, the NAM for sure is very vocal on these issues.
I think we're trying to be heard, but small businesses using the Internet to sell globally is such a new phenomenon that I feel like that the trade infrastructure of Washington and really other major capitals, they're not really aware of how much of this small business trade is actually going on. So that's a real challenge.
Thank you. I would just agree. I think small businesses face a real challenge. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry, big manufacturers can get their voices heard. It's much tougher for small businesses to get their priorities out there and incorporated into these agreements.
Thank you. Is there any, can I ask one more question, Mr. Chairman? Is there any ideas of how we can get that do a better job of bringing small business into that discussion better, Mr. Brightfield?
It's difficult, as you know. The text of the TPP, for example, has not been released yet. There are chapter summaries that are available to cleared advisors. I'm a cleared advisor, so I can go to a room and read those summaries. But it's hard to know if you don't know what the provisions are or where they stand. So that is a real challenge. I can give that some more thought, and if I have some other answers, I'd be happy to respond in writing after the hearing. Very good.
Gentleman's time has expired. The Chair would just note for the record that one of the mechanisms for the small business community around the country to get to Congress what it is they think about TPA and other things is this committee and us holding hearings, and that's what we're doing today. And this panel has done a commendable job, and I think the attendance of the members here today has been good on both sides too. So we're listening, and hopefully we'll enter that into our ultimate decisions on how we vote on these things. So I would just note that for the record. And the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Rice, who is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Gentlemen, I want to ask each of you this. Where we don't have a trade agreement at all, would each of you agree that we face more barriers on exports than we place on imports? Mr. Brightbill?
Where we don't have a trade agreement, you're saying, are there more barriers on export than there are on imports? Certainly, we're the most open and transparent market in the world, and I agree with the statistics earlier as far as the immense challenges, ones that are in the laws as well as laws that we don't even know about in foreign countries. So I definitely agree.
Mr. Stanek?
I would agree also, and all we're looking for is a balanced playing field.
Mr. Messenger?
Absolutely. As my testimony indicated, we're given our market, and we're not getting that much in return at times.
Mr. Beeren?
I would agree, and just note that the amount of exporting being done by our small businesses is pretty remarkable, given the current playing field.
Probably a lot because, as you said earlier, it's flying under the radar screen and the government hasn't stuck their hands into it yet, right? So what you're saying is that we are less competitive in the world when we don't have trade agreements. Would you agree with that? I know that Volkswagen in the past 5 years or so was looking to locate a facility in South Carolina, where I'm from, was on the list, and they ended up going to Mexico because we didn't have a trade agreement. ArcelorMittal in my district, steel company in Georgetown, South Carolina, just announced they're closing in 4 months. They'll lose about 300 jobs. And they cited as the primary reason unfair trade from China on steel. So I do think trade agreements are really important. I don't think they're a panacea. I don't think they solve all the problems. I don't think you can. There's too many ways, in my opinion. Mr. Brightbill, could you define for me what is currency manipulation?
Sure. Currency manipulation is, and it's done. It's defined more clearly in other studies and things, but it's. I think it's generally defined as prolonged intervention by a government that leads to maintaining currency or levels or pushing them in a specific direction for an extended period of time.
I would ask the rest of you guys, Mr. Stanek, what do you think is currency manipulation?
I would suggest that it's a country unfairly moving its currency to impact itself favorably at the expense of other countries.
I would ask the rest of y'all this question, but it's really probably not in your area of expertise. Mr. Brightbill, how do you manipulate currency?
There are many ways that currency can be manipulated. All I would say is that the evidence of what has happened with China over the years and other countries makes it clear that there's a problem here, that it's harmed U.S. businesses, and that we do need to take action to address it. And I think we should take action in trade agreements and also under U.S. law.
And I'm going to ask you just very obvious questions, but so if a country, let's say, manipulates its interest rates to artificially low levels, does that have an effect on the value of its currency?
You could look at that under using Commerce Department subsidy rules and decide, is that an unfair subsidy that distorts the playing field, or is that something else? So I think there are ways of creating.
I mean, there could be cogent arguments that the United States is manipulating its currency, right?
I think that.
I'm just asking if there's an argument.
Sure, arguments can be made against us around the world on any topic, but I think the evidence doesn't demonstrate that the United States is manipulating currency in the same way as China.
And I'm not trying to be, overly argumentative, but I think China might disagree with you on that. Now, with respect to prolonged deficit spending, does that have an effect on currency valuation?
Well, I think you could evaluate all of these, but I would say that companies like ArcelorMittal and others in the steel industry would argue that currency manipulation hurts their ability to export and to compete around the world, and I think they would like something to be done.
And I agree with you. The point I'm trying to make is that there are myriad ways from tax policy to, income tax policy to government regulation to things that you would not consider as currency manipulation to manipulate currency. And I don't know, the trade agreement is just going to be a framework. And we have to do the best we can to set up enforceable mechanisms. But we honestly, I don't believe, can sit here and foresee all the potential ways that a country could manipulate trade. And we have to do the best we can with our framework to make us more competitive. Because everybody sitting here in this panel, and I think everybody sitting here on this panel agree that where we are without a trade agreement is a bad place. I mean, we all know we are making ourselves less competitive by not doing what we can to strike down these barriers to our exports. And my time is over. Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time's expired. And the gentlelady, ranking member, is recognized. So I wanted to ask a follow-up question.
Thank you. Mr. Brightbill and Mr. Stanek, you mentioned before that we need to help, and Mr. Messenger, you also mentioned that at the beginning you got a lot of assistance from the Department of Commerce. And so some of those programs will help small businesses either get the type of technical assistance that will help them take advantage of overseas market. But when I meet with small business exporters, one area where it is challenging for them is to find affordable export financing. And so the Exim Bank will fill that void that exists. But I have, there is a debate going on here in terms of, you know, if the Exim Bank is providing the assistance that small businesses need. Here we are debating this massive trade agreement, free trade agreement, where it's supposed to open and provide more opportunities for small businesses. And yet, when you look at the reauthorization language of the Exim Bank, it doesn't increase the small business lending cap that was put in place years ago by 20%. So, Mr. Brightbill, you said that there are some areas that need to be addressed within the Exim Bank. Can you mention one or two?
Sure, Congresswoman. Great question. Like I said, I do support reauthorization, but there have been abuses of the system. There's been some concerns about how loan recipients are selected. I can tell you some of my clients also have concerns when loans are made abroad to companies that then manufacture or mine raw materials, for example, that then end up in foreign steel that comes back at dumped and subsidized prices. So there are concerns about who Exim lends to, the procedures for lending, and also, as you say, small business concerns as well. And those should be looked at carefully as part of this debate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here. Our panel, I think, has given us excellent testimony. Trade is clearly one of the more important issues that Congress is going to be facing in the upcoming weeks and months when one considers TPA, TPP, TTIP, and the Exim Bank, and a range of other issues. And I think you've made a great contribution, all of you, towards this committee and our colleagues understanding and grasping this issue and hopefully doing the right thing. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you.